Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming this evening for a wonderful presentation on fungi in your garden, backyard mushrooms. My name is Toby Sevich. I'm with the New Rochelle Public Library. Joining us, we have the Chappaqua Library, the Yonkers Library, Larchmont Library, Irvington Library, and Pound Ridge Library, and the wonderful Bob Finkelstein from Healthy Yards. I'm going to hand it off to you.
Hey,
A couple
welcome
things.
everyone.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to just add a couple things.
Okay.
If everybody can make sure that they mute themselves, you can turn off your video. It's not necessary. Um, if if you will put any questions you have in the chat, we will get to them at the end of the presentation. We will not go through them throughout the event. And lastly, if you get a chance, if you could just mention which library you're from, what town you're from, that would be wonderful. And now, Bob, I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Toba. And also, tonight's presentation will be recorded, and when ready, it's accessible through the New Rochelle Public Library via YouTube. Welcome, everyone. I see a lot of familiar names on the participant list, which is great to see. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, which I shall do in a few minutes. But first, I just wanted to make a few comments about Healthy Yards. I'm co-president of Healthy Yards New Rochelle, and we're part of a large regional dedicated movement. Some of our primary goals are to educate and promote pesticide, chemical-free gardening, the use of native and pollinator plants, and many other healthy practices. And later on, towards the end of the presentation, I will put our email address in the chat if you would like to sign up to get our quarterly newsletter. And also, we have a very active Facebook page that we invite you to be a part of. Like I mentioned, I have the great pleasure of introducing Taro Ietaka. Taro is the Assistant Director of Conservation for Westchester County Parks. He is also a mushroom aficionado and former president of the Connecticut Westchester Mycological Association. I have the honor of getting to know him through our work together at the Native Plant Center, and he has just joined our steering committee. And he has a wonderful presentation tonight. And yes, I'm sure the question will be answered, can I eat that? So without further ado, let me turn it over to Taro.
Right. Thanks so much. Glad to be here. My name is Taro, and as Bob said, I'm a mushroom aficionado. There's so much to know about fungi and mushrooms that I can't call myself an expert, but it is something that I've been looking at closely for the past 20 plus years. And so the purpose of today's presentation is to kind of acquaint people with what mushrooms and fungi are, and more importantly, what they're doing on your property, in your gardens, in your backyards, next to your trees. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they ambivalent? We'll answer a lot of those questions. And I should point out too that a healthy yard does have fungi. I don't think you could claim to have a healthy yard without. So if you are seeing mushrooms in your backyard, often that is a good sign. Not always, but often. And we will look at some of those during the presentation. I love questions, so please do put them in the chat. This presentation, normally I do this one in about an hour and a half, but I'm going to condense it down to fit about 45 minutes to leave enough time for questions. And so with that time constraint in mind, I'm going to jump right into it. And prior to this presentation, I had asked Bob that if anybody that is attending would like to send photos of stuff that they've taken in their own yards, then I would feature those. So I will do that in a second. There are also some pictures from the Ardsley Pollinator Pathways group who attended this in the past. So here we go. These are some beautiful pictures taken by you. Starting with this iconic mushroom. This is the fly agaric or Amanita muscaria. It's taken in somebody's backyard. Anybody who's seen the Smurfs knows this mushroom, although in Europe it has a red cap with white spots. In North America, it tends to have the yellow cap with the white spots. Great mushroom, worthy of a presentation all to itself. The origins of Santa Claus may be associated with this mushroom, Alice in Wonderland connotations. So lots of interesting stuff about that one. This is another one. Anybody who gardens and mulches and puts down wood chips, I'm not talking like colored dyed mulch, but just natural wood chips, you will see this. So these are bird's nest fungi, and the immature ones are in the bottom of the picture, and they have a fuzzy cap. When the fungus matures enough, the mushroom matures enough, the cap pops off, revealing these spore sacs, and those are the eggs within the bird's nest cup. So it's a fascinating one. Tiny, tiny, about quarter-inch big, so you have to keep your eyes open, but you will find them if you're looking. This is shaggy mane, also called a lawyer's wig, common in lawns. And this one is interesting because it will dissolve into a black liquid, and that's why it's called an inky. And even though mushrooms in this genus tend to be edible, some of them do cause reactions to alcohol. So you cannot drink a beer and have a inky cap meal. Not a good combo. This is the Ravenel stinkhorn. This was taken by one of the Healthy Yards New Rochelle members. So the Latin name for this one is Phallus ravenelii, and because this is a family program, I will go to the next one. This was also submitted by a member, and it looks like it's going to be sulfur tufts. These grow out of logs, out of wood in the fall. It's a useful decomposer, so it's breaking down that woody material. This is a wine cap stropharia. So this is also common in yards and mulch. Has a purplish cap that's kind of the color of red wine. As it ages, it turns to the color of white wine. So wine cap stropharia, it's edible and it actually can be cultivated. So it's a good kind of supplementary crop for vegetable gardeners. And I'll talk about how you can grow those. This is also taken by a Healthy Yards New Rochelle member. And this one's a little tricky. It looks like it's a giant puffball, but it looks like it's been through some stuff. It's normally kind of white like a volleyball, and this guy has lost his white covering and is showing some battle scars. But based on the size and the growing location, it really does seem like it should be a giant puffball. Edible. You can turn them into lasagna, cutting fine slices of the mushroom and using them in place of noodles. This was eaten by a Healthy Yards member. So this is the honey mushroom, and it's a commonly eaten mushroom in Europe. You do have to be a little careful with this one. And more importantly, for most homeowners that aren't looking to eat the mushrooms, this is an indicator of a sick tree. And we'll talk about that later on. And if you can see here, there's that dead tree in the middle, and around it is a circle of mushrooms. So this is a common sight in the fall around here. So white, grayish, even a little bluish mushrooms growing in a circle. It's called a fairy ring. The old legend was that, you know, at night in the rain, the fairies would come out and dance in a circle, and wherever their feet touched the ground, a mushroom would grow. That's actually not how this happens, but it is an interesting phenomenon. Basically, the fungus is in the soil and is consuming its nutrients outwards from its starting point, and then on the outer periphery is where it fruits. So this is a close-up of one of those mushrooms from the fairy ring. Okay, so those are some beautiful pictures from our neighbors, and it just goes to show that if you are looking in your yards, you should find mushrooms, including some fascinating ones. So what are mushrooms? What are fungi? And we'll do the textbook stuff on the quick side, but fungi are a kingdom of their own. They are heterotrophs, meaning they cannot photosynthesize. They cannot make their own sugars. So fungi are actually more closely related to animals than they are to plants. And just like animals need to eat other animals or plants in order to get their nutrients, fungi have to do something similar. They either have to parasitize or decompose or form partnerships, and we'll go into that later. So one thing about fungi is they grow in a very different manner than animal cells. So fungi grow in strands where one cell forms and then another cell forms at its tip, and it creates these long strands. So an individual strand is called a hypha, but more importantly and more frequently known are what are called mycelia or mycelium, a single one. And this is basically a conglomerate of, or an aggregation of those hyphae forming this cobwebby network. This photo is great, by the way, and I should point out all these photos you can find either on iNaturalist or on Wikimedia Commons. And I do have the credits at the end. This is a great photo, though, because it actually shows the beginnings of the mushrooms forming. So those are called primordia. The fungus, the part of the fungus that is eating and digesting and growing is that mycelium, that cobwebby stuff. The things that it produces when it's ready to reproduce, the mushrooms, that is the fruiting body, it is only for reproduction. So what you're seeing when you see a mushroom growing out of the lawn in your backyard, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's the apple on the apple tree, as the analogy. And the real action, well, the real action for growing and feeding is below ground or in the substrate that it's growing on. Okay, so because they can't photosynthesize, they have to get their food in a few different ways. So decomposing is what they're most known for. So they will eat wood, they will break down hair, they will break down even oil. So one of the cool things is after the oil spill in the Gulf, there were some entrepreneurs who experimented with absorbing oil using human hair, put in like pantyhose, and then introducing certain kinds of fungi, especially oyster mushrooms, into that oil-contaminated hair pantyhose thing, and the mushroom can actually consume and digest that stuff. So they are masters of breaking down complex chemicals, specifically cellulose and lignin. So the really complicated chemical molecules that are formed by trees and woody plants are really only broken down by fungi and bacteria. So what you're seeing here is some white rot in the center. So the fungus is feeding on, and I always mix up whether it's the lignin or the cellulose, but it's feeding on one of those two. And as it digests it, it breaks down that wood. This is brown rot, so it has that very cubical shape. You'll see it every time you go for a walk in the woods. You're going to see some decomposing trees that have that almost like a playing dice or die kind of look, and that's brown rot fungus. Here's that white rot fungus again, turns it very soft, and you can just tear it apart with your hands. And that's all being done by fungi. So without fungi and what they're doing to dead woody material, we would be raking a whole lot more, and we'd be burning our yard waste to get rid of it. Fungi do that process naturally. They release those chemicals and those nutrients back into the soil, make them available for plants. So it's a really important job they're doing. And then things like yeasts and molds are fungi too, but they are so strange and weird. That's like a specialty in itself. So we're not going to go into them much, but here's an example of a strawberry being decomposed by a mold. Okay, so in addition to decomposing, they can be parasites. And this is where homeowners should be concerned when they're seeing mushrooms coming out of living trees. It's generally not a good sign. So the first, oh, actually, that's not the first. They are parasites on plants. They can be parasites on other fungi. They can be parasites on animals. So here we have an insect larva that was below ground, probably pupating over the winter. And it had the misfortune to meet a mycelium from this Cordyceps militaris species, which basically entered the napping pupa and consumed it from the inside out, and then a mushroom popped out of its head. There's a fantastic series on HBO Max called The Last of Us, which is kind of like a zombie-themed apocalyptic show. And in this case, the twist is that the agent that causes people to turn into zombies is this parasitic fungus. Um, we do not think that is possible that it can jump to people. So there's a lot of liberty taken with that script, but it's a great show. Okay, this one, Armillaria, honey mushroom. So earlier I showed a picture of a cluster of these that someone had eaten. So Armillaria has the honor of being perhaps the largest organism in the world. So there's something called the humongous fungus out in, I think, Washington State. And basically, this fungus spreads underground for miles, square miles, and it's all the same organism. Um, they've sampled the DNA from one side of it, miles away, sampled the DNA from another cluster, same individual organism. The thing to note here, though, is that it can cohabit with trees. However, when the tree is stressed, sick, starts to decline, this armillaria, if it's present, can penetrate into the roots and travel up the bark of the tree and basically create something like this. So this is the rhizomorphs for the armillaria. So it's basically that mycelium, and it's consuming the living tissue, the cambium, basically girdling and causing the tree to die. So it can be a terrible tree pathogen, which is why if you happen to see that in your yard, you may want to get an arborist out to take a look at your nearby trees. And this is an example of a parasitic fungus that attacks another fungus. So the real mushroom is white, but when it's infected with this Hypomyces lactiflorum, better known as the lobster mushroom, it changes the color, the shape, and it takes an inedible mushroom and makes it delicious. This is one of my absolute favorites. We don't find it in Westchester, unfortunately, but it's a cool example of a parasitic fungus with some beneficial consequences, at least for people. Okay, and this is where gardeners should pay attention if they haven't been, because fungi play a hugely important role in plant health, in garden health. Because, again, they don't make their own sugars. They have to get it from somewhere. So rather than those hoodlum parasite fungi or the ones that are just kind of decomposing, the vulture fungi, these are the ones that are going to partner with living plants and basically trade nutrients for sugar, minerals, water for sugar. So this is something that probably everybody's seen. So imagine you purchase a new containered plant, and when you take it out of the pot, you notice this white fuzzy stuff all over. It looks kind of like mold, and you might be a little concerned. Take a hand lens, and if what you're seeing are what look like cobwebby strands, that is fungal mycelium. So these large cylinder shapes here, those are the plant's roots. The white cobwebby stuff are the hyphae of the mycelium for a symbiotic fungus. And there's all different kinds of symbiotic fungus that can do this. This is usually seen on woody plants. Generally on herbaceous stuff, you don't see this white mycelium growing on it. But one thing to note is look at the diameter difference, the size difference between a plant root and the mycelium or the hypha. And I'll explain why that's important in a second. There are also fungi that, instead of kind of growing around the roots of the plant, will actually penetrate into the plant and grow within the cells of the plant. So that symbiotic mycorrhizal relationship that we saw, the ectomycorrhizal, so on the outside of the roots, this used to be called an endomycorrhizal fungus. Now they call it arbuscular mycorrhizal fungus. And basically these black and purple spots are growing within cells of plants. So this is a high-powered magnification. And what the fungus is doing is offering it some protection from other fungi, so kind of increasing the health of the plant. They are also associated with better mineral uptake, especially, I think, phosphorus. But very important role that they're playing. And then there are also lichens. So everybody's probably seen British soldiers before. This is a combination of a fungus living with green algae. This is a cross section of a lichen, and everything that's white is the fungus. Oops, sorry about that. And the green represents the algae. So lichens are also a fascinating organism. I've taught whole classes on lichens. I've got a soft spot for them, but basically, there's a question of, are they parasites? Are they symbionts? They've been described, the fungus has been described as farming the algae. And then there was an 18th century botanist, Crombie, or maybe 19th century, who called the fungus the cruel fungal tyrant, and the algae are the damsels in distress that have been captured by this monster. So it all kind of depends on how you look at the world, what you think that relationship is. And basically what's happening is the fungus is extracting sugars from the algae, and the algae gets to live within the fungus, protected from predators, protected from the heat of the sun and UV light. So there are some benefits, but there are also some drawbacks. Okay. And reproduction. And this is really fascinating stuff. So fungal reproduction gets very complicated. Yeah, way complicated. We're not going to go into that at all. I don't understand it all. But what we're really interested in is the dispersal method, and that is the mushroom. So the mushroom is the reproductive part of many fungi, not all of them, but many fungi. And they've come up with some crazy ways to get their DNA out into the world. So just like people know that plants, maples will have the samaras that helicopter away from the parent plant. You'll get wind-borne seeds. You'll get poop planters, so any kind of fruit-bearing, fleshy fruit tree is going to use animals and birds to disperse its DNA. With fungi, it's a little different. So here, I'll give a couple examples. This is Pylobolus, and this one is a very small mushroom. And basically, it creates these high pressure spheres. And when it's ready to disperse, it basically shoots out a spore ball that will then stick to whatever it hits. And then the spores will kind of disperse from there. This has been known if you park your car next to a lawn where this mushroom is, those little spore balls will stick to your car and it will look like dirt that is very hard to get off. So they're a little bit of a nuisance, but it's a great strategy. This one, oh, sorry, I should have warned you. This is a puffball. And just like it shows, the spores puff out when raindrops hit it or when animals step on it, when kids poke it, you're actually helping to disperse the spores. The typical mushroom with the cap and stem, like this guy, the whole purpose of the stem of a mushroom is to lift the spore-bearing surface, which is the cap that has these gills, to lift it off the ground just enough so that wind can blow away the spores that fall from the cap. So mushrooms that grow out of trees that are already elevated don't necessarily need the stalk, which is why they will just look like shelves coming out of wood. And truffles, these guys are amazing. So it's an underground mushroom. How can it get its spores out? Wind is not going to do it. Rain is not going to do it. So what they do is they create a smell that is ambrosia to certain types of animals. Around here, we do have truffles, but they're not edible for humans, or maybe they are, but they're not good. Instead, flying squirrels are a big consumer of them, and deer. But the traditional white truffle of Europe, so strongly scented that pigs and dogs can sniff them out underground. They'll dig them up, consume them, and then it becomes poop planting at that point. Interesting story about truffles is in Italy, I believe, they will teach dogs to sniff these out. And one of the tricks that the truffle hunters will use is put a little truffle oil on the mother dog's nipples so that the baby dogs, the puppies, have that association so that into adulthood, they still want to find those truffles. Okay, so what are they doing? What is happening in your yard? Well, mushrooms can be helpers, they can be hinderers, and we'll talk about that. And we'll also talk about how to get them to appear in your yard if you don't think you have them and why they might not be there. We'll talk about that now. So first we'll do the bad. So pathogens. Yeah, fungi have been the scourge of several of our important tree species in the Northeast within the past century. So think chestnut blight, think Dutch elm disease, anthracnose that hit dogwoods. And there are many other examples of fungal pathogens that can devastate our plants. Often they're introduced. So chestnut blight, we think, came from Asia. And that's why Asian chestnuts have developed an immunity to it, whereas our North American chestnuts did not have that. So yes, the fungus is a terrible pathogen there, but it's because it was introduced by people, unfortunately. Still the fungus's fault, not blaming people for it, but it is something to be aware of. So again, when you have a pathogenic fungus, it's parasitizing the plant that it's growing on. So we'll start with this one. So this is Ganoderma. There's one called the artist's conch. Sometimes you'll see a species that grows on dead hemlock trees that has a bright red shiny cap with a white smooth underside. They're heart rotters and butt rotters. So this is going to basically weaken the tree at its base. That will create a fall hazard. So again, if you see something like this in your yard and the tree is near or within falling distance of anything important, you're going to want to get an arborist to take a look at that. We have anthracnose. This is a common one on maple trees. There's something that's called tar spot, which is a different fungus. So parasites should not really generally kill their hosts. It's really kind of counterproductive for them to kill their hosts. So this maple anthracnose will cause early leaf drop. Sycamores get them the same anthracnose early in the season, which is why sometimes in a wet spring, you'll get your ratty looking sycamore will drop all its leaves and then will produce a second flush of leaves later on in the season. This is a common one you find on twigs. This is Nectria cinnabarina, and this is a relative of the chestnut blight. Fortunately, this is not going to kill your tree. It will kill branches, but it tends to be on smaller twigs. So that's another one that's common. Verticillium will hit your garden plants more often, causing this wilt. This can be pretty difficult to diagnose. One thing you can do is you cut into the stem of the plant and you look for black streaking on the inside, especially of woody growth, and that could be one of the things diagnostic. You can also take pictures or send samples to Cornell Cooperative Extension and they can diagnose it. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a cure for verticillium in this kind of setting. So if you've got garden vegetables and they're starting to show this, other than cutting and burning if you can, you're not going to want to compost this. It can be a pretty destructive fungus. This is a really common one too. This is cedar apple rust, which has got this fascinating life cycle where it switches hosts. It switches between something in the rose family and cedars. And this is what it looks like on a cedar. It looks like this weird alien gummy ball. And then when it jumps to something like a melancher, then it will have this kind of tentacly life cycle. So same fungus, just two different hosts. It switches from year to year. and very different looking fruiting bodies. So plant pathogens, got to watch out for those. But we have plenty of helpers too. So there's been a lot of attention paid to mycorrhizal relationships. So Susan Simard has a great book called Finding the Mother Tree that brought a lot of attention to this. There's the German author Wohleben, who also talks a lot about this. Paul Stamets is kind of a mushroom evangelist. And there are many, many claims about them, everything from curing cancer to, helping sick trees in a forest by acting as kind of like a social security system or welfare system where healthy trees will transport sugars through a fungal network into a less healthy tree. Some of the claims are disputed, but I think there's incontrovertible evidence that there are positive benefits. And one of the ways we know that is 80% of all plant species, or sorry, I think it's families, 80% of plant families partner with fungi. The remaining 20% do not, and they are bacteria partners. So anything in the Brassicaceae, for example, so your broccolis and your cabbages, they don't want fungal partners. They like bacteria. And just a little aside, so if you're familiar with garlic mustard, which is a common invasive plant in our area, that is one that has bacterial partner, and it seems to actually suppress the growth of fungi, which is why garlic mustard in a forested setting around us is not good for forest health. Okay, so what is good for forest health? Well, if you are seeing soil fungi that are not directly coming out of wood, usually, not always, but usually what is happening is the fungal mycelium is growing below ground. And remember, we looked at that great picture of the containered plant covered in the white fuzz. So the mycelium will surround the tree's roots. And what's happening here is the tree is going to be leaking out sugars. The sugars are absorbed by the fungus, and the fungal network, the mycelium, is going to expand way beyond the tree's root line. So the rule of thumb for a tree is that the roots can extend about twice the spread of the crown. So if the tree is 100-foot diameter from branch tip to branch tip, the fungal network the fungal network is going to extend way beyond that. So again, think of that humongous fungus that's stretching for miles in Washington state. So it's basically acting as an extension to the tree's roots. But also because the fungal mycelium, the fungal hyphae, the individual strands are much finer in diameter than the tree's roots, that means they can get into micropores in the soil. So they are able to access minerals and water that a tree's roots cannot, and they will steer that to their to their tree partner in return for that sugar. So that is what's happening. That is why this partnership is so important. So this is an example of pine seedlings. This is from a clear cut on the West Coast. So the three sad looking ones on the left, there was a clear cut. They planted more pines, and this is what they found. All right. And then on the right, they did another clear cut, but in this one, when they planted the pine seedlings, they added some soil from a mature, healthy forest. So basically, they were inoculating the soil when they planted, and you can see much better root growth, much better foliar growth. So certain fungi definitely can help with plant growth. Another one, oops, sorry. Sorry, technical difficulty. Okay, that one we saw, that one we saw. Okay, back on track. So this is a product for sale. So I'm a little skeptical of this photo, but in this one, they're claiming that the plant on the left has been treated with their special mycorrhizal blend, and the plant on the right has not. clearly the one on the left is better, but I wonder if there are additional reasons for that. That said, you know, having those mycorrhizal partners is not only beneficial, but absolutely essential for certain plants. One other really cool photo is this one. So this is an electron microscope. And what we're looking at, so you see the blue threads, so that's fungal hyphae. The green ring is also fungal hypha, and the yellow is a nematode, a soil nematode. And what happens here is the fungus is creating these underground little lassos, and they somehow attract the nematodes. The nematode slithers through, and then it basically constricts and then consumes the nematode alive. There are many harmful nematodes, so this is going to perhaps help with them. And then fungi have also been shown, the beneficial fungi have also been shown to act as kind of a protector of trees and the plants from pathogenic fungi, which is why having that partnership is great, because it can help keep things like that dangerous honey mushroom at bay. Okay, so first question for you is if you're not seeing mushrooms in your yard, should you be doing something to attract them? So there are products you can get. So there are mycorrhizal powders that you can add when you plant, or you can do compost. But the mycorrhizal mixes will often list the species included. The ectomycorrhizal are more important for woody plants, the endomycorrhizal for both. The question of whether you need it or not is another story. So if you're adjacent to a forest, you probably don't need to amend anything. If you're living in a new subdivision, for example, and you have that really bad contractor soil, that is a situation where you would want to introduce these. If you've had a lawn for 50 years and you're ripping it out and you're switching over to native plant garden, that is when kickstarting it with some mycorrhizal applications would also be beneficial. These are some of the ones that you would see coming out of that mix. So this is kind of an ugly looking thing, easily mistaken for something else. That is a component. This guy is also not the prettiest mushroom, but it is used for dyeing. So Pisolithus tinctorius. So wool dyers will use this one. This is also another one that is found commonly in the mycorrhizal mix. And the mycorrhizal mix is going to be the spores of these species, not the whole mushroom. So compost teas can have all sorts of beneficial bacteria and fungi and yeasts and things like that. So I know that growing apples in the Northeast, I've heard, is very, very difficult. And when I had an apple tree, they were not the prettiest. There is a book about organic apple farming in the Northeast, and he teaches people how to make these compost teas that are supposed to act as beneficial protectors of the plants, and fungi and yeast are going to be a component of that. And lastly, cultivation. So if you're gardening, why not have an extra crop with low maintenance needs, easy to upkeep? So mushroom growing in either a native plant garden, a veggie garden is possible and good. Just to be aware of, you should keep track of where you are inoculating fungi. So I'm not talking about just that random mushroom that's popping up in your yard. It may be edible. If you're not sure, the COMA group, COMA Fungi, COMAFUNGI.org is our local mushroom group, and they have many knowledgeable people that can help you with identifications. But if you are actually going to try to inoculate and grow your own oyster mushrooms or shiitake or something like that, you would want to keep track of where you are planting them. So there are about 4 deadly mushrooms that grow in our area. So learn those ones. But there are many deadly plants in our area too, and that doesn't stop us from doing our veggie gardening. So for example, this guy here, and this is not to scare people, but this is poison water hemlock. Looks pretty similar to wild carrot, Queen Anne's lace, same family. And so this is an example of one. It's called funeral bells. It grows out of wood. It's got a brown cap. It's got a little ring around the stalk. This is shiitake, delicious edible, one that's commonly grown. And the point is just to show you that you shouldn't have you should have a respect for mushrooms when it comes to eating them, but you shouldn't be afraid of mushrooms. You just have to learn the basics so that you can do it safely. And again, there are groups like Coma that can help with that. For cultivation, it's even easier. If it's growing out of a place that you inoculated, you can be pretty sure looks like this. It's growing where you want it to grow. That's probably what you got. Spore prints are another great way to confirm identification. So if you take a mushroom cap, put it on a piece of paper, the spores will fall. The color of the spores is a very important diagnostic feature. So that's useful for wild mushroom foraging. And how do you actually do it? So the most common way is you buy these wooden dowels that are inoculated with the fungus. You drill a hole in a log, you tap it in there, you seal it with wax, you wait about a year, and then you get mushrooms growing from that log. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the basics. This is a cultivation farm almost, and so they're probably growing oyster mushrooms out of that. You can also buy kits, and this is an oyster mushroom kit. Whole Foods used to sell these. I don't know if they still do. But one word of caution is if you do a kit like this with oyster mushrooms, it drops a lot of spores and they are sticky. So I heard about someone who went away on vacation, left his mushrooms growing in his living room, got back and his coffee table was covered in white spores that were sticky. He basically had to throw the table out. So just a word of caution about farming mushrooms inside. And outdoor cultivation, there are a few ways to do it. So wood chip piles are great for looking for mushrooms. You'll often see when you take apart a mature wood chip pile, the mycelium growing all over. So rather than let nature plant a mysterious fungus in your wood chip pile, you can jump ahead of the curve and inoculate it with something like the wine cap stropharia that we talked about. And I'll show you a trick for doing that in a second. This is a bluet that is also sold, and I believe they tell you to add it to garden compost and wood chips, and you get this delicious edible. All right, so the special technique for growing wood chips in your garden, this is Bill Bakaitis, who lived in the Catskills, and his trick was when you're digging your garden beds, basically you want to dig a trench, so maybe around a fence in between your rows. So you dig a trench, you are going to add wood chips, and the key is to find the mycelium or find the stropharia so that you can collect it elsewhere and then add it to your soil. So you're adding the stropharia spawn with the wood chips, and his secret is to add a slurry of dog food to it, like dried dog kibble, and then cover it over with more wood chips. And we know that the stropharia will consume the wood chips, break them down, free up a lot of the nutrients for your garden plants, and you get the harvest of the stropharia mushrooms as a bonus. So that is a trick you can do as well. And with that, we are at 7:46. So I did it. I rushed it and did 45 minutes. But just a couple things, some good resources for you. So this book, 100 Edible Mushrooms by Michael Kuo, is my absolute favorite. If you like the science, then this Teaming with Fungi book is good. And if you're a new mushroomer, highly recommended you learn from an old mushroomer who's still alive, because that means they did something right. So COMA, Westchester, Connecticut Westchester Mycological Association is a great one. We're going to be starting our walks every weekend, beginning usually late April. And yep, and if you want to buy and start farming your own mushrooms or look to amend soil, here are some resources as well. And I think I'll end here and take any questions.
Hey, Thank you, Taro, for an outstanding presentation. We have questions, so I'll go ahead and go through those. Barbara Burnap noted, when strawberries start to go bad, as in the photo you showed earlier, what is in the plastic container that causes that besides moisture?
Oh, so spores are everywhere. So with every breath you're taking, you are breathing in hundreds or thousands of spores. And luckily, we have very well developed immune systems. But that also means that in your refrigerator, you've got spores. You probably have bread mold spores. You've got yeasts. You've got all sorts of stuff. There was a scientist out of, I think, Cornell who has time-lapse photography of the inside of her fridge, and she basically just let food decompose in there. So I don't know the exact species that's attacking your strawberries, but it's ambient in your house. It's ambient in the air. They're all over the place. So even the story about the guy who discovered penicillin was basically because in his lab, he left the window open and it basically introduced itself to his petri dish or something. So yeah, spores are everywhere. There's nothing you can do about it.
Next question from Susan Wildstrom. Actually, it's a comment. She lives in Somers, but goes to the Chappaqua programs. When my sons were young, we would pick mushrooms and make spore prints by lining the mushroom caps on colored paper.
Yeah, that's fun. Different mushrooms have different color spores. So pink, purple, brown, green, white. So you can kind of just do a little experiment. And when you pull the caps, you'll have a mystery picture.
Neat. From Liz Silverstein. Does the cedar rust make the amelanchier fruit inedible, and can you get rid of it?
I wouldn't eat it. Um, I don't know that it's toxic or poisonous or anything, but I wouldn't do it. Um, And no, getting rid of fungi once they've infected something is incredibly difficult. So there's like all sorts of copper solutions that are sprayed. I think the key is to spray before they're infected. So if you do something like neem oil, then I think they tell you to do it on a weekly basis in the spring to prevent those rusts and other things from contaminating your trees. But once they're infected, it's incredibly difficult to get rid of. If it's leaves, you're going to want to rake them when they fall. And again, you don't compost them. You're going to want to bag and dispose or burn. Um, but yeah, controlling fungus is very difficult, as anybody with ringworm or athlete's foot could tell you.
Okay, and before we get to the next question, I did post in the chat the Healthy Yards New Rochelle, New Rochelle website, email, and we also have a Facebook page. We'd love for you to join. We share a lot of information with Westchester pollinators and other local groups. So lots of great information there. Nancy Davis says, please mention that group again. And I think it was around the time you were talking about the shiitake mushrooms. Um, Nancy, if you want to maybe clarify in the chat what you were looking for. And while we're waiting for that, Dominic Schmidt, do you need to protect the mushrooms you are cultivating from animals, and which animals feast on them?
Sorry. Do you need to protect? Oh, the Bilvacitis stropharia thing with the dog food. Yeah, I've always wondered about that. Notice that in that picture, he had it, I'm guessing on the inside of the fence, because if you put dog food in your yard, you're going to get raccoons and skunks for sure. So I don't know that I would do that if you know they're present. Um, Mushrooms are eaten by squirrels, by deer, by turtles. So one fun thing to do is if you go for a walk in the woods in usually like June, July, you'll see mushrooms stuck in the crotches of trees. And it's not some kind of prankster walking through the woods in front of you. Squirrels will pick certain mushrooms and dry them in trees and then eat them later. Um, Morels, which are like the holy grail of our local edible mushrooms that come in May. Deer are a big competitor for those mushrooms. which is why in Westchester I tend not to find them. But then when I go someplace where there's more active hunting and fewer deer, you tend to find much more of them. And and then turtles too. Box turtles, for example, love to eat mushrooms, so you will see them.
Okay, Amy Villalba is a true mushrooms can eat plastic.
So yeah, they've looked into that. So yes, I believe so. So there's a book called Mycelium Running by Paul Stamets. I'll write that in the chat. And he has a chapter on mycoremediation of toxic wastes. And he lists chemical weapons. He talks about in Chernobyl, like there were fungi feeding off of the radiation. So yeah, pretty amazing what they can break down. However, with the plastic, I don't know if it's gone prime time or if it's just kind of an experimental thing at this point. I don't think there's a commercial application for it, and I don't know why, but I'm pretty sure that has been verified.
Okay. And looks like Nancy was looking for a clarification that you already put in the chat about the coma
Hmm.
group. So
Yeah.
thank you. From Nancy Davis, do you have a schedule of walks or do you do walks?
So that'll be published on the Coma website. So the Morel walks in April, May are members only because they're such a hot item. But after that, the walks are open to the public, and they'll list them on the schedule there, the calendar there.
Right. Okay. Yi Jiao, our shiitake mushrooms get attacked by slugs. How do we prevent that?
So your best bet is to ring the if it's growing on a stump, for example, put diatomaceous earth all around the outside because they don't like to crawl up that. You could put a little saucer of beer nearby. That is definitely a good way to catch slugs. But those are the two suggestions I have for you.
Okay, so beer and mushrooms, you're talking about slugs that are going to get pretty high, it sounds like. So.
Yeah.
And you put in the mycelium running by Paul Stamets. I have a question. How has climate change affected the environment for mushrooms?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are mushrooms that when I was starting out 20 years ago, we would only find in the fall, and now we're starting to see them appearing in spring too. So that is interesting. Um, Most mushrooms will not grow in winter. Once the ground freezes, they're basically done. There are a few exceptions for winter mushrooms, but we think the seasons are getting longer. But there are other things that are affecting mushrooms perhaps more noticeably. So invasive species. So again, like the garlic mustard, Asian jumping worm, I suspect, is terrible for our fungal populations. If you think about how they're turning and churning the soil, disrupting mycelial networks, creating drier soil more prone to erosion. I suspect that's really bad for our fungal populations.
And what are the common, it's the white mushroom, smaller ones that we see in our lawn?
Um, Hard to say. There's a few species. I'd have to see a pic, but a lot of those small little lawn mushrooms can be a little tricky to identify. Yeah.
All right, we just don't want our dog, of course, eating them. Let's see, we might have a few more. From Nancy Davis, because of last fall's drought, what can we expect this spring?
Um, so the mushrooms that would have appeared last fall, you'll have to wait probably until this fall. So there is definitely a phenology, even though climate has kind of caused a few things to go out of whack. So for example, if you're looking for hen of the woods mushrooms and you didn't find any last fall because it was so dry, you're not going to find them this spring. You have to wait until this upcoming fall. But 2 years ago, we had a really wet fall and it was fantastic mushrooming early on. And then it seemed like the fungi had all spent themselves producing fruiting bodies. And so even though conditions were good later on that season. We just didn't see them. So it's possible, not no guarantee, but it's possible that with the drought, the fungi didn't produce that year, but they may still have stored up nutrients. So it could be bountiful, hopefully. That's my optimistic answer.
Okay, and Susan Wildstrom has another question. Do the mycelium survive frozen ground from fall through winter? Will mushrooms come back the next spring? Same mushrooms, spore survival? How does that work?
Yeah, so the mycelium does survive underground, or above ground in trees too. So they're evolved for our winters, and yeah, basically they're like perennials. Most of our mushrooms that we're used to seeing the fruiting bodies of, they're like perennials.
Okay, I don't see any other questions at this point, and we're just about right on time. Thank you, Taro, for a terrific presentation, and thanks to all our participants. We had a great turnout this evening. We will look to have another presentation in 2 or 3 months, partnering with the libraries. And again, this was videotaped. And in a couple of weeks, you can go to the New Rochelle YouTube if you just type in the name of the presentation on backyard mushrooms, New Rochelle Public Library. It should show up. So without further ado, again, thank you everyone, and especially Taro for a fantastic presentation.